Welcome to Sons of Patriarchy. I'm your host, Peter Bell. Sons of Patriarchy exists to expose the hidden power structures behind Christian nationalism. Through survivor testimonies, shared storytelling, and honest expert critiques from across the political, theological, and cultural spectrums, we shine light on systems of abuse and authoritarian control principally focused on Doug Wilson of Moscow, Idaho, and the movements he has founded and influenced, as well as across Reformed and conservative churches. Our goal is not just to inform, how did we get here, and what do we do about it, but to spark meaningful conversations in homes, faith communities, and public spaces about what a healthier, freer, and more just society can look like. Together, we can dismantle harmful narratives and build communities of mutual respect and diversity. Sons of Patriarchy aims to do what Doug cannot. We will unite people. We do not demand you be like us. We meet you where you are. And while you may not always agree with us, we hope we can agree on this. Churches should be safe. You can find us on all podcasting platforms, as well as YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, and sonsofpatriarchy.com. Ad-free episodes, bonus content, listening a week ahead of time on both audio and video, monthly Ask Us Anything specials, and many more perks are available across 5 membership levels at patreon.com/Sons of Patriarchy. Much of the same is available via Apple Podcast subscriptions for $4.99 a month. You can give to this work directly at donorbox.com/sons-of-patriarchy. Exclusive Sons of Patriarchy merch is available at sonsofpatriarchy.com/merch. If you'd like to get a hold of us, desire to interview either myself or co-producer Sarah Bader, or you're a news media agency looking for information on Christian nationalism, patriarchy, Doug Wilson, or anything else we covered in the series, go to sonsofpatriarchy.com/contact. Now, on to the episode. All right, everyone, welcome to Sons of Patriarchy. We'll sort of call a special episode. We had an episode with Kimi Harris, and then she's eponymously known or anonymously known as Amanda, and talking about abuse in ACBC. And we're going to describe I won't describe it quite yet because I want to leave the audience in a little bit of suspense before we actually get into the meat of this. But we're going to be talking about both a church, also a counseling ministry. I'm aware of this. From what I know, this is the biggest, or one of the biggest, Christian counseling accrediting agencies / centers. But these 3 reached out to me. I forget how soon after the episode went out, and says, like, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to this. You need to know, and we need to let people know. I've never seen more evidence and more people than what they've described, so this is not just an isolated or just these 3 people. But if we can first, before we get into the questions, if you can introduce yourselves, and then we'll get into the first question, just so A, I don't mess up one of your names, and B, just so people can hear your voice before we get into this actual recording. So if you can introduce yourselves, we'll start with you, Abigail.
My name is Abigail Degnan. I'm originally from Long Island, New York, and I'm currently in Central Virginia, and I'm a full-time writer and editor.
Whoever wants to go next.
My name is Rachel Longshore, and I'm originally from Northern Indiana, but I live now in Southeast Florida.
My name is Elena. I grew up in Virginia. I currently live in Greenville, South Carolina. I am working on my master's degree in social work right now.
Awesome. All right. So again, before I even get into this, we'll talk about Vision of Hope and everything else. But how did you guys get into this in the first place? Become part of this organization, become part of this church, become part of this counseling internship and horror show and everything. What brought you there in the first place? What either intrigued you about it, or brought you some hope, like maybe this is a place I need to be, or this is where the gospel is pure, or this is the greatest counseling in God's green earth. So what brought you to VOH, ACBC, all of these things on the front end?
I can go first. A little backstory. I was adopted from Russia, and I grew up in an abusive home in terms of spiritual abuse. There was a lot of just high control, high focus on like not questioning whatever the adult said in my life. So I was often told things like I was going to hell, or I could lose my salvation for something as simple as disagreeing with my parents. I started to struggle a lot with self-harm and suicidal ideation. Life was so difficult, and my identity was just focused on people pleasing so much that I didn't have any hope. I didn't really see any way out. When I became 18, I moved to South Carolina and went to a college there. But of course, my depression didn't just go away. I learned about biblical counseling there in the South. But I eventually was asked to leave that college because of the suicidal ideation, and they told me about Vision of Hope. They said that it was somewhere that I could get more extensive biblical counseling. It was somewhere where I could have hope and focus on myself and my needs and my trauma. And so I really wanted to, I wanted to get better. I didn't want to have all of these issues. And so I agreed to move to Indiana. I went and lived in Indiana with a friend's family and applied to VO, really just with the hope of kind of getting my life back, getting my just life just focused in on healing and not being suicidal.
Awesome. Well, thanks first and foremost for sharing a little bit of your story and being open and honest. Trust me, I know it's not easy when you know people are going to be listening to this that you can't see on the other side of the screen or other side of the earbuds, but I am 100% positive somebody who's listening to your story saying like, oh shit, that's my story too. I didn't realize that somebody else went through this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Abigail, how did you get into this mess?
Well, I came to Vision of Hope in July of 2020 as an intern, and I came there because I wanted to become a counselor. I wanted to help people. That was always what I felt like my calling in life was to help people and be an advocate in some way. And, Vision of Hope promoted what they called this incredible internship where I could gain a biblical counseling certification, which I grew up in a church that used biblical counseling, so I was familiar with it. And they promoted this biblical counseling certification, ACBC, and that if I did this internship, I could get that certification, help hurting women, and grow in my faith. And at that point in time, although I had grown up in an amazing Christian home, I'd actually faked being a Christian my whole life. I was not actually a Christian. I did not have true faith in God at all. But everything I'd ever known was based in Christianity, so I kind of just always faked it. And I kind of hoped that doing something like an internship in ministry, especially something as intensive as Vision of Hope, where you're working full time, I kind of hoped it would somehow make my faith click for me because I desperately wanted to believe in God and I desperately wanted to have real faith, even though I didn't. So at the end of June of 2020, I had just graduated from my undergraduate and was kind of just looking for the next step in life. And my parents told me about this internship, which they found out about it through going to faith churches, ACBC conferences, where like a Vision of Hope table was set up. And, they got to my parents and my parents told me about it. And so I looked it up online. It seemed amazing. Like the marketing was really cool for it. Like there was a beautiful mansion on the website. All the reviews seemed good, the testimonials. And so I was like, oh, this seems great. And so I applied that same day that I found out that it existed. And then I had a brief phone interview the next day. And I was planning on joining their January 2021 cohort of interns. And, that would give me like 6 months to plan and move. But when I had the phone call with the intern coordinator, she told me that they were pretty desperate for interns for the following month in July, which was quite literally a week away from when I applied. And part of me was like, that's really soon, but it was in the middle of COVID. the place I'd been working at was closed down for the time being. And so I decided, I have nothing else going for me right now. And this place could maybe help me grow in my faith, give me a direction to take my career. So I just decided to take a leap of faith and go. And less than a week later, I was moving from Long Island, New York, leaving my family and all my loved ones behind to go to Lafayette, Indiana to be an intern there. I'd never stepped foot there before. I was going based solely on what I heard about it, what I'd researched, and the phone calls that I'd had with them. They were able to lock me in really quick. And honestly, what ensued is something I can really only compare to as watching a horror movie. And obviously we're going to get into all of that later, but I actually, for my master's thesis, ended up writing a memoir about my time at Vision of Hope and my journey of recovery after it. And the people that read this and my thesis chair told me it had a very horror movie-esque feeling to it, because you're starting out and everything seems great, and then slowly kind of things just fall apart. Because the first few months were okay. I was exhausted all the time, working 40, 60-hour weeks unpaid and living off of what my parents would send me. But slowly the layers started peeling back. And I really think we worked so much there because it helped to blur the morality of some of the things that we were told to do. When you're so busy going, there's not really enough time for you to question that what you're doing and what's going on isn't right. And so you accept it all as good. And a lot of the things that scarred me were just the things I witnessed happening to residents and the things that I partook in while being brainwashed by the program. And I'll be getting into all of this later, but, that's kind of how I arrived at Vision of Hope and what led me to there. And by the time I left, I was suicidal. I had walked away from Christianity completely for a long time. And I also left with an eating disorder, which is ironic because it's a place that's supposed to cater to women with eating disorders. So that's that's the little beginning.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And next one, Rachel. Before Rachel even speaks, I have a tiny little story. Right when I first got her email, if people don't already know that much about Moscow, Idaho, one of the leaders' name is Jared Longshore. And I swear when I saw Rachel's email at first, I was like, is somebody playing a joke on me? Did somebody create a profile that is gonna give me a heart attack, or are they gonna is his sister playing a joke on me? I was I don't really know what's going on, but that's my little my little story. So yeah, Rachel, introduce yourself and how you got into this mess.
Yes, so I got my degree in psychology with an emphasis in Christian counseling. So I chose that major because I wanted to help people with similar struggles as I was having. I struggled with depression, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, and an eating disorder since I was 12. So when I graduated with my bachelor's, I had a degree, but I had no practical knowledge of how to actually help people. But my home church had a biblical counseling center, and the counselors received their training in that Faith Church in Lafayette, Indiana. So my mom and I attended their biblical counseling conference in, I believe it was 2018 and 2019 that we went. So I learned about Vision of Hope while I was there, which is a residential counseling center for women who struggle with addiction, self-harm, eating disorders, and unplanned pregnancies. So I felt like this place would be the perfect place that I could learn how to really help people. So I became an intern at the same time as Abigail in July of 2020. So they advertised themselves as a training center and a great place that you can get ACBC certified while you're doing the internship. And my dad had always instilled in me to get all the certifications you can while you can. So I thought, I'm going to be there. Why not get it? So before I got to Vision of Hope, I had already completed phase 1 and phase 2 of the ACBC certification. So phase 1 includes completing some required readings, attending the Biblical Counseling Conference Track 1, observing 10 hours of biblical counseling. And then phase 2 is a 50-question essay format. So half the questions are in regards to theology, and then the other half are in regards to counseling. And then the third phase, which is the final one, involves counseling in a supervised setting by someone who's already certified for 50 hours, and then meeting with the ACBC fellow to go over your counseling sessions. And then once all those things are completed, you are ACBC certified. So the executive director of Vision of Hope was an ACBC fellow, so that allowed interns to get certified during their internship. So when I started the internship, there was a lot of things that didn't really sit right with me. And after 3 months, I actually wanted to leave. But I had made a commitment to a year-long internship, and I didn't want to go back on my commitment, so I was determined to stick it out. There was times I heard staff gossiping about me and saying like I was a very rebellious intern and that I was doing everything wrong, basically. Some of the things that felt weird that I was labeled as a rebellious intern was something like I chose peas instead of green beans to go with a meal, and I did not consult staff, and so I was in trouble. There was also an instant that I chose a girl that wanted to do meal prep, so she was going to be in the kitchen, help me cook the food and all of that. I was supposedly should have known that she was struggling with self-harm and that she shouldn't be in the kitchen because there's knives in the kitchen, even though we had a very good system of keeping track of sharps, so it wasn't like there was any risk, and I was with her the entire time. But because of my rebellious actions, I was actually not allowed to start my supervised counseling hours until I started being more obedient to the staff and following the policies. Another thing that I got in trouble for was sharing Bible verses with residents. I thought this was like...
Wait, sorry. Say that one more time.
So I got in trouble with the staff.
Just want to make sure you heard it
Yep.
crystal clear. Everybody else heard it crystal clear.
So I got in trouble for sharing Bible verses with residents because the intern's job is to tell residents basically what have you learned in counseling, what has your counselor already talked to you about, and we're not allowed to. The interns are just little interns. We don't know anything, and so we can't provide any kind of counsel, even a Bible verse or praying with a resident. That was literally why I got in trouble, because that would confuse them, because it's additional counsel to the counsel they're receiving from their counselor. So yeah. So I mean, I ended up starting my counseling hours in November of 2020, and then February 2021, I was offered a part-time staff position that I accepted, and then November 2021, a full-time staff position became available that I accepted as the fundraising coordinator and counselor.
All right. As a lot of us, thank you all for introducing yourselves and letting me know that I should not go to Vision of Hope and share Bible verses and pray for people, or else I might be disciplined for sharing Bible verses and pray for people in a place where you're supposed to share Bible verses and pray for people.
Yep.
So that makes a lot of sense.
It does,
Oh man.
But when you're there, you're brainwashed. You're like, this is normal, right?
That gives people a little bit of an idea of what we're about to hit. So this has already kind of come through, but I wanted to ask that first question just to orient how you even got into this place and why you're here. So you've talked a lot about Vision of Hope, sorry. But what's, and you've talked about those who come in and what they specialize, but what is Vision of Hope, and how does it relate to the Association of Certified Biblical Counselors, the accreditation agency / counseling training program, all that? So what is Vision of Hope, and how does it relate to ACBC itself?
So I can talk about that. So basically, Vision of Hope is a residential biblical counseling program. So they help women, like we've talked about, they help women with unplanned pregnancy, eating disorders, self-harm, addiction, and other things. And they basically believe that the Bible is the only thing that should be used to treat all problems. So all the counselors that are there are ACBC certified. None of them are licensed therapists, except for the clinical director was licensed as technically as a social worker. So I won't go too far into ACBC counseling because I know you talked about that with the other podcasts that you guys have. So people can check that out if they need to know more about that. But the program and the phases, I'll kind of explain how that worked at Vision of Hope. So it was a minimum of a year with no maximum. So there was residents who would be there 3 years and still not graduate. So phase 1 is the most restrictive, and that's where everybody starts. It's a minimum of 6 months, and they basically must be in an intern site at all times other than sleeping. They don't have any freedoms. They must follow a schedule that's planned for them fully. There is a subcategory of phase 1 called fruitful, where residents are given a handful of additional freedoms, like they can use the bathroom by themselves, or they can do their own laundry or something like that. Yeah, for real.
I don't mean to laugh as it's just, I wasn't expecting they're allowed to use the bathroom when they want to.
Well, so because it's a place that they help women with eating disorders, some women after, like, especially after meals, would want to like purge in the
Like
bathroom.
bulimia. Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
that's kind of why that is in place. And
Sorry,
then
I should not be laughing or interrupting you, but it
No,
was
you're
just
good.
hard not to.
Yeah. And then phase 2 of the program is once the resident has been there at least 6 months, they create their own daily schedules, but those have to be approved by staff. They can go off campus of the Vision of Hope house and can get a job. And it's a minimum of 3 months. And then phase 3 is also a minimum of 3 months, and it's when a resident moves out of the house, but they still receive counseling and support from Vision of Hope. They can move back home to wherever they're from and get counseled virtually, or the resident a lot of residents would end up staying in Lafayette because they would find friendship and connections and support there. And then once their counselor and the staff determine that they're ready, a resident graduates and has a ceremony where they're required to give a verbal testimony of their time in the program. During these phases, at any time, a resident can be phased backwards. So there were residents that would be in phase 3 and then be phased back to phase 1, day 1, or phased back to phase 2 or whatever is determined by the counselor. So this could be one relapse of a resident drank beer during phase 3 and boom, you're back to phase 1, day 1. The program is technically voluntary. So at any point, a resident may choose to leave the program, but there is a lot of psychological threat of harm. So the staff try to convince residents to stay there, saying things like, your family's never going to accept you if you quit now. If you are a true believer, you would know that God wants you to submit to your authority and stay in the program. You'll never get over your life-dominating sin, and things like that. And then they would label any resident that left basically leaves in rebellion, and the staff view basically that they're going against what God wants for their lives, and that Vision of Hope is like the only place that they can be in God's will. And then current interns and residents are banned from being friends in regular communication with residents who have left the program for at least 6 months after they leave. And then residents can reapply to the program after 6 months of being gone. So, Abby, do you want to tell us about the structure of the intern program?
Yeah. So the internship is typically 1 year long that you commit to, though a lot of interns end up either extending their internship or just becoming staff members and staying kind of the cycle. But it's typically 1 year that you commit to, and you work approximately 40 hours a week, sometimes a lot more, unpaid in exchange for free meals and housing, both which were not good, which we'll be getting into later. Again, they advertise it as a chance to get your ACBC certification while you're working there. So many interns are dually working on becoming ACBC certified while they are doing the internship. An intern kind of runs the house on a day-to-day basis while staff does the counseling and behind-the-scenes work. But interns are the ones who are running the schedule, assisting residents in immediate crisis, delegating work to the residents, supervising, cooking meals, etc. Like, they're doing the brunt of the work. Each intern is assigned to a staff member that they kind of assist throughout the week. And so I would normally assist a staff member who handled social media and blogging and articles and stuff like that. So I helped create graphics and posts and stuff for their website, in addition to doing my normal intern duties. Interns really do most of the work of the ministry just to make sure that the ministry runs smoothly on a day-to-day basis. And because of this, and because they labeled it an internship, it was really easy to take advantage of us, especially being unpaid and not really having any kind of standards set in place to protect the intern. But we'll be talking a lot more about that later. So,
and I will talk about Vision of Hope's counseling is a little bit unique than just like ACBC counseling, in that the residents are going to be there 12 to 18-ish months minimum. So the counseling is kind of directed around that. And they have several long study halls a day in which they're supposed to do the counseling homework. So because of the structure, of the program and the schedule, the counselors do a lot of book-centered counseling. So I've actually seen counselors at Vision of Hope not even open the Bible during the biblical counseling session because they're so focused on whatever their book they're going through with the counselee. And like, it's a biblical counseling book, so it's about whatever topic, but still it's book-centered instead of Bible-centered a lot of times. And they kind of have a cookie cutter model of counseling that you work through. So when you first get there, it's salvation worksheets, the character of God, idols of the heart, theology of suffering, and then they finally get to the reason that the resident came to the program. So if they came for eating disorder, then they'll read a book about that, and then pretty much any other topics that come up. But yeah, it's kind of very much cookie cutter, and I think Elena will get into this with her story, but there's a lot of residents that wouldn't even make it to 6 months in where they're going to talk about, oh, I'm here for self-harm or I'm here for an eating disorder, because there's so much like build up to that.
Yep. I got a question before we get into that. Whoever wants to answer this is, and maybe I missed it. I know I heard you said that the program coordinator is licensed. Is this program licensed by the state, or is it just like they just
No.
when they decided, hey, we're gonna found Vision of Hope and do all this stuff?
Yeah, nobody. There's no licensing. They advertise themselves as a residential ministry, not a residential treatment program, because if that's
it
how they
sounds
can
like
kind
a
of
treatment program, even though they say it's ministry.
But they kind of work around it by saying it's a ministry. Yeah.
Gotcha. Because I want that to be clear. Because what you're describing, if somebody just came off the street and didn't know what a ministry was, they'd be like, "That's a treatment center. That's what people go to if they need help." And okay,
so no therapists, no doctors, none of that.
Okay, that helps clear some of this stuff up. All right, so they're not recognized by the state as a treatment center, so they get around by saying we're ministry, even though what it sounds like is they're defining the schedules of the residents. They tell the residents what to do, and this is meant for a specific purpose. So it sounds like a treatment center to me. Maybe Vision of Hope doesn't think that, but
and
sure sounds like it.
Grants for being a residential treatment center. Because that was part of my job for a little bit, and I was like, I feel like this is wrong.
It's because it is wrong. That's why you feel like it's wrong. It's because it is wrong. All right, we've itched. Anything else that you guys want to add on how you got to Vision of Hope or expectations based off what Vision of Hope said they were? And then we'll get into what it was like from your perspective. So anything you want to add to that before we get to your individual perspectives?
I don't think so.
All right. So we'll start off with what was it like? And Elena, I think you're first up on this one. What was it like being a resident at Vision of Hope? So people have already heard kind of the front end stuff that it's a ministry, even though it's really a treatment center. They're not recognized by the state. Who knows who's coming up with what, based off what principles, or what actually works. If it's any psychology practices or research back stuff, doesn't sound like it. So what was it like as a resident at Vision of Hope?
Yes. Unlike for interns where they kind of had a little bit of time to research, for the most part, I kind of went in blind. I didn't really know what to expect. I had some things in mind, there would be biblical counseling, there would be an element of safety, but I didn't really know what that would look like. I was just hopeful of being able to just work through my trauma, work through the self-harm. So I actually went to vote 3 times. I never graduated.
Jeez, okay.
Yeah. The first time that I went, I was actually only there for a very, very short time. But it was about 6 days. It's not, at least at the time that I was there, it was not common for you to be able to start counseling until the mid to later part of the second week. And so while we were still had to do the long study halls and stuff, we were just expected to just kind of read the Bible or journal and just kind of lead ourselves and whatever. And so I was very stressed out about worrying about what my family thought, because I knew they didn't want me to be there. And I wasn't getting support that I needed. And then when I was caught by an intern just writing about kind of almost manically writing I shouldn't be here, She was like, you need to be focusing on reading the Bible or whatever. Like, this is a study hall. And so I asked to talk to somebody, like a staff member, and I did talk to a staff member for a little bit, but there was very little support, so I just left. I was like, I can't do this. I have to go home. But since my home was very abusive and problematic, by the time that I had left, I was kind of like, okay, I had time to breathe finally, had time to like just, talk to my friends, because like we didn't have access to our support system. At VO, there was this idea that you're supposed to be like relying on God and relying around the people that are there to help you. So like we had like 15-minute phone calls a week, like one 15-minute phone call a week, and then we could write letters. So after I kind of talked to my support system, I realized that I wanted to go back, but there was the 6-month waiting period. So I had to wait 6 months before I could reapply. I had to explain why I left and why I thought that was wrong, and how I planned to handle things differently the next time that I was there. And then the application took another like 6 months. At that point, it took a long time to just get in. So it took me a year. I finally got back. I stayed there for 9 months. And then the third time that I was there, I stayed there for 6 months. So really, it was just a lot of rules. Like, boiled down, there was this idea of having so many rules until you just kind of broke you down until you realized, hey, I can't do any of this. I have to rely on, for them, it was rely on God. And if you didn't do that, then there was something wrong with you. Like there was something wrong with your heart, your spirit. Maybe you weren't saved, maybe you weren't praying enough. And so like it kind of boiled down to that essence of rules, break the rules, maybe you're not saved. Starting off at VO, there was a lot of invasiveness, again, kind of residential treatment, that you would expect from there, but like a nearly full body check, interns going through your belongings, through everything while you sign a bunch of paperwork that you don't know what you're signing because you're exhausted. Because like you'd have to get there at like super early, like 7 o'clock in the morning. And then basically you would go through all of that, super invading, super exhausting, and then you would just go straight into the schedule. And the schedule was full morning to night. Like you would get up at 6 a.m. You wouldn't have like any personal time until about 8:30 p.m. and then you were supposed to be in bed by like 10 p.m. So you just kind of jumped into that. Again, there was like no counseling until at least the like second week. And the standard for biblical counseling was a lot of like Rachel said, there was just this idea. So you had to start with a salvation packet. Even if you were sure, like you knew that you believed in God, you still had to do the salvation packet. They would still kind of put that like seed of doubt.
What was that salvation packet?
Yeah. And so it would be like, it would basically just go through the whole concept of salvation, start with Adam and Eve, start with the fall, and then, man's condition, and then how to be saved. And I think kind of how to live like a, sanctified life.
I see.
In a nutshell, I think it was like 12 different sections. I don't know, Rachel.
It was
People who
long.
self-harm, present thoughts, anything else.
It was like
salvific
100 pages, and there was like you would have to read.
So let's just add to all your physical and mental ailments and say like you might not be saved too.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And like that was the element that caused me to leave. Both the second and third time was having my salvation questioned, because since I grew up with that kind of idea, like you could just lose your salvation if you looked at your parents wrong, like I had made the decision to not believe I could lose my salvation. And so then when I was going to this place and they were saying, well, maybe you're not saved, it was just a struggle. But so like that, it started with like a salvation packet. Then there was a lot of different stuff that you would read and look at. You would also do something called like Idols of the Heart. There was some material where it would talk about kind of like boiling down to like your heart's focused on these idols or these like sin focuses. And so then you would do like this, like, I like to call it a personality test to find out what your idols were. I think it was
like, I already freaking told you, I'm depressed.
Right, but that's not
No,
that's
that's
not your idols. Your
surface
idols are
level.
like control. Your idols are like control or safety or like I don't know, those are my top big ones. But so like you would answer these like questions. Some of them were super absurd. and then you would highlight them, and then you would color code them, and then another intern would do the same thing with a copy of yours to make sure that you guys kind of came to the right conclusion of what your
Sounds
idols were.
formulaic. Like if you give this system and you put in these answers, then this has to be the response or the resolution that if it doesn't fit or you don't work with this or it doesn't resolve in the way that we think it will, then it's not our system that's wrong. It's you are the wrong one.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people would be so depressed when they were doing like Idols of the Heart. Like everybody knew, they're like, "Oh, you're doing Idols of the Heart." Like they're just like in full depression.
I already feel horrible coming in here. Why are you making me feel even worse when I'm here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you need to see your ugly sin. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. It's like, trust me, I see it. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so we had to do a lot of like different things like that. I also read a book on suffering. So it took me, I think it was like not until like my 5th month that I even talked about my story and the trauma that I had experienced. Some women did go in and they just word vomited and they made the counselors listen. I was not that person. I was the like, try to follow all the rules, do all the things. And so it took a very long time. I had read this book on suffering, so I felt like I almost needed to like minimize what I had experienced, because like I hadn't experienced like paralysis or like exploitation. And so like I was kind of set to minimize the things that I had experienced, which was 16 years of sexual abuse, a bunch of religious abuse,
suffering in some third world country for my faith.
Exactly.
It must not be that bad.
Exactly. And so we took about 2 sessions to talk about my trauma.
Okay. Oh my gosh. The more you guys talk, the more I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah. And then like we had the trauma work was basically like reading this book by a certain person talking about your past and putting your past in different buckets, which only just confused me more, because one common symptom of PTSD is self-blame and shame. And so you often see or believe that it's your fault that you were abused. And so having this like setup where it's like, what's your innocent past guilty response? Well, my dad abused me, but I also talked back to him. So clearly that was like not a trauma response, but a guilty sin response. And so honestly, I really just ended up being more confused and more overwhelmed by my trauma. So after going through all of that, I became very suicidal. And so their general process for when people were struggling with things like self-harm and suicidal ideation was you sign this like contract, this like no harm contract, that you basically promised to not hurt yourself, to go to somebody if you were going to, but you had to like say that you had gone through these different like Christianized coping skills. So like praying, reading your Bible, listening to Christian music, meditating on verses. And then if you weren't at a point where you could feel like you could agree to not hurt yourself or not try to kill yourself, then you would talk to staff. And when I was there the second time, they did this the third time too. They made it feel like you are going to have to leave and go to the hospital and you'll get hospitalized. And mental health is bad, right? So going to the hospital, going to the psych ward was like a terrible thing.
And people who are trained for this is bad. Go to us who are untrained, because that's good.
You'll have to go to the psych ward. You won't be able to come back here. You'll be kicked out of the program. So you need to just, commit to not trying to kill yourself. And so the staff member gave me a project after I agreed to write 1,000 Reasons to Live. And I did something called Stuck Like Glue, which is basically just following the intern around all the time for like, I think it was a couple days. So everyone knew that I was like struggling. I was writing these 1,000 Reasons to Live, which was, kind of difficult. And then I got in trouble like a week later.
Even for those who want to live, you're trying to figure out what are 1,000 reasons that I have to live.
Literally.
I got in trouble for not finishing it within like a week. And so then it was like, if you don't hurry up and finish this, then you're going to get consequences. And so, all of a sudden I became like, all of a sudden the blue sky and the green grass were reasons to live. And like, every single person that I ever knew was like listed. And it was so meaningless. It was just a thing that I had to do. And like, it didn't fix my suicidal ideation. I just knew that I needed to like shut up about it and not like ask for help with it. Um, and so that was kind of how things were. A lot of times it was like there was a lot of kind of going back to that, what's wrong with you? What is your problem? Same with like nightmares and flashbacks. I was not the only person who just started to hide the fact that they were having flashbacks or that they were having nightmares, because the questions were always, well, have you thought about scripture? Have you, what is your counselor what did your counselor say about this? Like, we don't talk about this in counseling. What do you mean, what did they say? And then like, for nightmares, it was like, well, did you pray and did you like, think about Bible verses before you went to bed and after you woke up? Like, I carried like a thick thing of index cards, like at least this thick, of just Bible verses and quotes that I just carried with me 24/7, to try to like have this like idea that if I just thought about enough Christian stuff, then then I'd be good, I'd be set. Meanwhile, like outside of just like the counseling and help aspect of it, they had group classes, but they were really just like reading Christian versions of self-help books, or things like Trusting God, or like the Gospel Primer, or like some different ones on like friendship, purity, that kind of stuff. Or it was the afternoon class was just listening to sermons, like from mostly from Faith Church. And so like there was very little discussion because we weren't allowed to talk about why we were there, and it was considered like the term was J or junk. So it was like, don't talk about your J, don't talk about your junk. So like even the conversations, if we did have them with the books, it was pretty surface level because you couldn't talk about, how like maybe that like the book on anger did like resonate with you. But a lot of our time was spent cleaning. We were cleaning obviously the house, but we were also doing lawn care. We were cleaning the community center. We were cleaning the church. Every single day we were spending at least 2 hours cleaning something at Faith Church, or its community center. And then long study hours. And so there was a lot of just like busyness, a lot of just busy work kind of thing. Like if somehow we just stayed busy and we thought about God all the time, then we were set. And then like one thing about that kind of interacts with Faith Church is like there was an element of privacy, and so we weren't really like identified as the residents, but at the same time when you see a group of women just walking around together and they can't leave, like it was kind of obvious that we were the residents. And it often felt like this sense of like us operating in a bubble where like we just had these signs of like damaged or broken or sinful or problematic. We were just like, vo women just walking around. So there was a lot of just shame. Like I felt terrible for being a resident. I was a generally insightful person, but if I like made too many insightful comments, even in like Sunday school, then I would have conversations with my counselors and they would be like, you're a resident, you're not an intern, you're not staff, you're not here to give people advice or to encourage people. Like you're just here to learn about God and learn how to not, engage in sinful behaviors. And so there was just a lot of shame in that idea of being a resident. I tended to be like, kind of like I said, like the person who followed the rules. So I only had like significant consequences one time. And that was when I like admitted to just having some personal but negative like thoughts and that were considered sexual. And I had to write like 5 different essays about why sex before marriage is wrong, why masturbation was same-sex marriage is wrong, like all of these things. And consequences often were during your free time. So the like hour and 30 minutes that we had for free time, and then on Sundays we had some free time. Like you had to do those consequences during that time kind of in this classroom. So everyone saw that you were on consequences. And it was again kind of like that shame element. If you did something wrong, then you have to do all these useless assignments and everyone knows that like, you did something bad. But I also observed a lot of things. And so I'm just going to read from this real fast, but no talking consequences were a big one. So residents would be either controlled with what they were allowed to say in certain settings. So, like, you can't talk in Sunday school because you're not applying what you're learning. Some women had complete no talking consequences. I think Abigail might talk about this later, but they weren't allowed to say anything unless it was to an intern for need. There were again those like negative feelings of not relying on God. Everyone kind of had this idea of, in the beginning of counseling, it was more of a, how much trouble am I in? Like, how bad of a week did I have? Because the start of counseling was inevitably, well, here's what you did wrong. Here's what the intern said. Here's what we noticed. You know, you shouldn't have done this or that. They had orange slips for like if you were struggling. And so it would be like, you should have filled out more or you should have filled out less. And there was like,
So the counseling was doing this.
yeah, in our biblical counseling 1 hour a week session.
There was some
Their quote unquote therapy. Yeah.
There were some staff members that would like print emails that they received from other staff members or interns that was basically like tattling on the residents about something that they did that they're judging them for. And they would highlight it and like bring it to them and be like, you want to tell me about what you did this week? And then like they would be like, I don't know what I did. And so she like read this whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
if they were, that's why they're not certified by the state, because this would be HIPAA violations all over the place.
Literally.
Yeah, and so there was a lot of like fear. Like, I remember when I was in regular, after all of this, when I was in therapy and I did something that I considered bad, and I was like terrified to tell my therapist, and she's like, you're an adult, you have like free will, like I'm not gonna like judge you or punish
It's
you
also
for
not the
something
point
that you
of a
did.
therapist to do
Right.
that. That's not why
And
they
I was like,
exist.
my mind was blown because I was like, this is how, like, I'm used to being nervous and scared about how I'm gonna get in
Like, oh
trouble
shit,
for
you
everything
help
I
me as a
did.
therapist, you don't hurt me?
Exactly. And so another thing is that we had like I said, very limited access to our support people or our family. So most of us, people who had family super far away, got 2 15-minute phone calls a week, but those who had people closer, like a friend or something closer, you got 1 15-minute phone call a week. And they had to call you, and if they forgot to call you, then there was no making up for that. So it was either like they wouldn't be able, like, oh well, you can just talk to them the next phone scheduled day. It was like Saturdays and Tuesdays. And so like we would be upstairs in devotions, and you could just tell if someone, like, the phone wouldn't ring, or they would come up, the resident would come back up and they'd be crying because it's like that was their one opportunity to talk to their friend. And a lot of times they had to switch people because, like, you know, like, otherwise you'd only be talking to one person the whole time. And so there was a lot of just like difficulty and loneliness in that, but we were told that we needed to be relying on God and that we needed to be just focusing on ourselves and just rely on the support system that we had here. But also, a lot of the staff and interns didn't really want to hear you complain about not having someone call you, and so they would just be like, well, you know, what kind of verse can you like meditate on, or maybe you can just spend some time praying for them, and just kind of like do like a Christian dismissive kind of thing. Food, since there was an eating disorder, like, since people who had eating disorders were there, they kind of operated like they knew what they were doing on a nutritional basis. But
Yeah, if you have people with, like, sorry to interject, if you have people with eating disorders, aren't you required by the state to have somebody who's a nutritionist or has some sort of training in this specific, because this is like,
Well, it's a
all
ministry.
this is bad. Yeah, it's like,
so they get away with it.
yeah, they
that's
had to
still
be medically cleared, from what I understood.
Yeah, they would have to be like, if they were below a certain weight, they would have to reach a certain weight to be admitted to the program. And then if they were still below like the BMI of what they're supposed to be, they would be on weight restore. So then they wouldn't be able to participate in exercise or lawn care, and they'd have to eat like extra snacks or always have seconds on meals or something like that.
And we should add, this changed in 2018, I think, but in like 2016 and before, in 2017, workout was just walking laps You couldn't run, you couldn't stretch, you couldn't do anything that looked anything remotely like workout. It just was walking. Except for one day a week we had someone who would like do basketball or volleyball or something. So like food was portioned, and honestly it was too much for some people, especially people with eating disorders, and it was too little for other people. Like even women who were like pregnant had to eat the exact same amount that someone like just, and so there was no like catering to any specific person unless it was an allergy. And then sometimes they wouldn't even cater to allergies. So I'm allergic to things like ginger, allspice, and cloves. And they would make me like super dizzy, super lightheaded. But I still had to eat like food that had ginger in it because I didn't have a documented allergy. And so I would literally just like eat it, get super, super dizzy, and then look at one of the interns and they'd be like, incident report. And I'd be like, yeah. And so I'd fill out an incident report, try to chug a bunch of water to feel better. And I would literally just like hope that I could just pass out, because I knew that if I passed out, then maybe they would like stop making me eat it. So there was a lot of that. At one point,
There's also
a restaurant. Sorry,
I
go
was
ahead.
just gonna add about like there's a 30-minute window that you have 30 minutes to eat your meal. And if anyone like is late, like they take extra time because they have an eating disorder, it's their first day and like they're not used to eating that much food. So say they're like 5 minutes over or something, or even like 1 or 2 minutes, like they have to do an instant report for being late, which basically they just write like I was 5 minutes late finishing my lunch, and then they're on consequences that night, which is another some kind of packet that they have to read the Bible and do things and lose their free time for that day. So anytime a resident was late, whether it was for a workout or finishing a meal or something like that, you would have to do a late incident report and you get consequences. So I just wanted to add that while we're at food.
Yeah, and the consequences, at least for being late, were super like shaming and just kind of like, like just going through the Bible and like being like, not like respecting other people's time and all of this stuff. Like a lot of their stuff was just super cheesy religious stuff that just made you feel bad. There was like a restaurant that would like donate meat, but it was mostly fat, and we'd have to like cut off like the actual like beef portion. We a lot of times they had they had food donated, and so food would be spoiled, like dairy would be spoiled. And so the amount of times that they served frozen spoiled skim milk was like insane. And so now I'm like super picky about that. Everyone had at least one meal where they just couldn't finish it, like whether it was because it was outrageous, because they just threw like the house manager just kind of threw together some sort of concoction to use up food, or because it was a texture thing. Like for me, I remember it was cottage cheese, and like but you just had to like sit there and eat it, and then if you didn't, then like you were in rebellion and you were probably going to get consequences. And so there was no grace for even just like there were no grace for people who had eating disorders. There was no grace for people who didn't have eating disorders. Like it was just very like one size fits all. So that's kind of like a little like run through of some of the like more major points of just like what life looked like. But in a nutshell, it was just control. Like it was just how many rules can we put in here? How much can we make it feel like you are bad because you struggle with this, or because you did this, or because you were late, or whatever. And like that was just like daily life. And even in phase 2, like if you went off your schedule just a little bit, like you had to fill out why, and like there was kind of like, well, why didn't you figure this out? A lot of times people didn't have transportation. So I remember like walking to the bus station, but it was like completely icy outside, and so me and another resident, we literally just had to like slide our feet along like I think it was probably almost a mile. I can't fully remember how long the distance was, but we just slid our feet and like so that we wouldn't fall on our butts because it was all just ice, but we couldn't get transportation. And the road was like super, super busy, the highway. And so like a lot of women would bike and we would get in accidents or whatever because we'd be tired after a day of work. And so like there was just a lot of like, well, you need to figure this out for yourself. You need to problem solve. And if not, then, why are you causing trouble, or why, like stuff like that. So
Yeah. That is a lot. So we'll move to Abigail for the intern's perspective on Vision of Hope.
Yeah, and my perspective is a little bit has a mix of intern perspective as well as like just what I witnessed happening to residents, especially because I partook in a lot of the just crazy stuff that happened to residents because I was brainwashed. Um, so a little bit more like background on like how just the internship kind of starts out and works. When you arrive, you basically have 1 week of instruction and then 1 week of shadowing shifts, and then you're kind of on your own and you get thrown into the wolves to kind of figure out how to be a good intern. But the tricky thing about this, which Rachel kind of touched on a little bit earlier, was that because there's so limited amount of training, there's so much that you go into it not knowing, and there's like 30 pages of policies that you need to memorize. So 2 weeks is not enough time for you to understand how to, work with, you know, women who are struggling with, serious issues. Nevertheless, how to be an intern in a very interesting situation like Vision of Hope. And so if you ask a question to a staff member because you weren't sure of something, you'd be told you need to figure this out on your own. You need to problem solve. But then if you did try to figure it out on your own and you didn't do it right because naturally you don't know what you're doing, you'd be berated and told, why didn't you come ask me for help? You should have known better than to just take this on to yourself. Like Rachel's example with the peas. She chose a different vegetable one night. She was like, oh, I'm going to problem solve. And then she got in trouble for that. So it's very much like you can't really do much right as an intern. You're always afraid of getting in trouble. And the berating is especially true of the former housekeeping coordinator, who just even being in her presence used to give me anxiety and put me on edge because of how often myself and others were berated or scolded by her for things that we just had no training on, or even tiny mistakes like maybe an intern took a new loaf of bread out when there was already an open loaf of bread like shoved in the back of the shelf, and you'd get like a scolding for doing that. Um, as part of like the training, which Rachel touched on, we were never actually allowed to give advice or help to the girls that we were providing care to. And if they came to us in crisis, it didn't matter what the crisis was. We could only ever ask them, "What Bible verse have you been learning about in counseling?" Or "What have you been learning about in counseling?" But as Rachel mentioned, residents, and Elena touched on this, residents wouldn't even touch their trauma or the reasons they were at Vision of Hope until much later on in their stay. So when they come to us having a crisis from their problems and trauma, and we'd ask them, what counseling have you been given? They just tell us like, oh, I don't know. I don't know what to do. And so we were never actually really equipped to deal with the problems that were presented to us. And there were just several, like on a daily basis, several instances where I felt like a complete failure because I'd be in the middle of trying to handle a crisis, especially if a staff member was busy and couldn't come handle themselves. And I'd ask them about what Bible verse, have you been learning that you're supposed to be meditating on? And they would just, they wouldn't be able to tell me anything. And in some cases, this could even did definitely cause some traumatic situations for me because I would witness firsthand pretty intense mental episodes from residents. And I was 20 years old at the time. I was pretty young, and I had no outlet or understanding of how to process the things I was witnessing. And the same was very much for the other interns as well. And we were supposed to meet bi-weekly with the intern coordinator to kind of discuss how the internship was going. But for many interns, they were forgotten about when it came to these meetings and could go weeks or months without having them. And when you did have the meetings, it was very structured thing, like a list of questions on a piece of paper to talk about your goals and how things are going. It wasn't really just like a conversation to be raw and genuine, in essence. Another huge thing about being an intern was that we were always supposed to do everything we were told without questioning. And if we did question, we'd be accused of being in rebellion against staff. But they kind of work up their authority so much and definitely abuse some of the verses in the Bible that talk about authority in order to lead you to believe that whatever they tell you to do is from God. And so why should you question it anyway? And I can think back to one example of I was a counseling liaison for one resident where when her counselor was not at the house, I kind of just, did paperwork for this resident or approved things and stuff like that. And one week her counselor decided that this resident needed to wear a backpack filled with rocks for multiple days, whether she was eating, playing rec time, doing chores, exercising, anything. She had to wear this backpack of rocks on her back unless she was sleeping. And this was so she could imagine what the idols of her heart
I
feel like.
knew that was going to be the case. 100%
Yeah,
that was going to be the case.
yeah. And I was told by staff
It's like we
that
forgot Matthew 11 existed, that his burden is light and his yoke is easy.
yes, yeah. And so I was told by staff that this resident would likely come to me complaining of back pain, because obviously carrying a backpack of rocks, you're going to have back pain. As someone with back issues, like, I can empathize with that. And
So
I
for
was
the fitness
told,
industry, you do not do this stuff for
yeah,
even the strongest people in the world.
yeah, no, especially not for days in a row. Like,
No.
it,
And
I'm
rocks.
sure it can
Yeah,
cause long-term issues.
exactly.
And so staff told me that when she comes to me and complains, I just have to tell her, well, that's what your heart idols feel like. And she did come to me and, with tears in her eyes, told me that her back was in so much pain, and she asked me if she could just take a break. And I told her, you can't. Think about your heart idols as you deal with the pain. And as soon as the words came out of my mouth, like, that didn't feel right to me, morally or ethically, or like on a health level, on a conscious level. Like, it felt wrong. But I did it because I was told by staff that they knew what was best for that resident, and I was scared of getting in trouble if I didn't follow through. Because there were many times when I, I think I was considered one of the more chill interns, because I would let a lot of things slide because I, didn't agree with a lot that was going on. Um, but there was still, very much a fear for interns of getting consequences as well. And that was something you always kind of had to consider while you were on shift, which is something I'll be talking a little bit about later. But we were groomed from day one of starting the internship to not trust the residents and to pretty much always assume the worst, which is very unbiblical. We're supposed to, assume the best of each other. And we were literally told the residents cannot be trusted and to assume that they are manipulating us. And this bias against the residents really was threaded throughout Vision of Hope's culture, even in big things to little things. I noticed how they never believed any of the residents when issues would arise, even sickness, and they could be begging for medical attention. And interns might advocate for them and tell staff, this is what they're saying, I think they need help. And staff would call them a faker. And I think Rachel's going to probably touch on this later. But one instance for me that I witnessed was a resident came to me with some sort of this is 5 years ago, so I forget the details, but it was some sort of wrist or hand injury that she had. And I came on shift that day. She came to me crying and said that she's had this wrist injury for 3 days and staff won't take her to a doctor. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I ended up taking her to the doctor that day after, talking with staff. But the 3 days before that, they wouldn't take her. 2 or 3 days before that, they wouldn't take her. And they were just assuming that she was seeking attention and being manipulative and trying to, change the narrative, but to get more attention. As we talked a little bit about earlier, interns came to the internship under the understanding that they'd get free meals and free housing. But the free meals and free housing were not good at all. One huge issue was that interns had no privacy at all, and there were actually multiple times when the housekeeping coordinator would come into my room without permission, whether I was there or not. There were not locks on our doors, and I remember she would knock, but come in immediately, not giving you time to be like, hey, don't come in. And if you weren't there, she had free reign to go in your room and do whatever she wanted. And albeit most of the time it's oh, she's changing light bulbs, she's doing housekeeping stuff. But that housekeeping coordinator was also someone that a lot of people had issues with. So you just really don't know what she was doing or, what was going on there. And the fact that she just came in whenever we were in our rooms without, really asking permission was a huge issue. There were times when I lived in one room with 4 other women, and there were times when I lived with just 1 or 2 women, and we were moved around a lot, so I actually ended up living out of a backpack most days during my internship, in case they decided to just randomly up and move us to a new room. But a lot of the times I was put into 1 bedroom with 4 other women, although we did have an intern apartment that we all shared. So the living quarters were not very good. In addition, there were also always 2 staff members that lived with us, and this created a very unhealthy dynamic and meant that even when we were off shift, we had to kind of watch what we were doing, saying how we were acting. And if you did something that might not have aligned with Vision of Hope, one of those staff members, might try to, quote, hold you accountable or something like that. But really, it was just another control aspect. And this lack of overall privacy also extended outside of the house. Like I remember being spied on one time at church during a Sunday school class. Someone reported back to the intern coordinator how a guy that they did not want me seeing, had his arm on my chair for about a minute because he was trying to stretch, maybe even less than a minute. And when I met with the intern coordinator the next week, she called me out on it, and she wasn't at that Sunday school. So someone was watching me and reported back to her on what I was doing. So it's like, whether you were in the house or whether you were outside of the house, like, you weren't safe. And that created a really huge paranoia for me in relation to church for a long time. As Elena touched on, the meals most of the time were really gross and not something you want to eat. Like, Elena mentioned her meal that was really bad. It was cottage cheese. Mine was orange chicken, where literally the housekeeping coordinator we would cut up frozen chicken nuggets, put them in a crock pot with orange juice and orange marmalade, and call it orange chicken. And literally just frozen chicken. Like, it was so gross. To this day, I cannot eat orange chicken without being triggered. Like,
Did they really think orange marmalade and orange juice with chicken nuggets made orange chicken?
apparently. And like,
Oh no.
we would there were many, because I have a lot of food aversions and sensory issues, and so I struggled a lot with meals on shift. And there were many times I would leave in my end of shift report, we should not make orange chicken again, or we should not make this recipe again. Multiple girls are struggling with it. Like, it does not taste good. But that leads me to, like, another thing, talking about, like, interns just had no voices at all.
There was like a policy that the residents could not like complain at all about food, that they like had to be grateful about every meal that you were served. And so like nobody could ever say like, oh, this is disgusting, I can't eat this. Like garden and bake, we all know garden bake was everybody hated it. But yeah.
It, like, there are so many meals that I could touch on, but like the orange chicken was definitely the worst for me. And I skipped if I wasn't on shift, I skipped a lot of the meals and would just eat instant ramen and packaged cheese crackers for meals on end, because I didn't want to eat the food. Or if the meals did look okay, like something you can't screw up, like pancakes or something. Although they did screw up pancakes by trying to make pancake casserole, I think, at one point. But anyway, like, if there were meals that seemed okay, I would go to get a plate and eat it, and at times there wouldn't be enough food for interns, and so then I would still just end up eating ramen. And I touched on this earlier, but what's really interesting is that people go to Vision of Hope for eating disorders. At the end of my internship, I left Vision of Hope with an eating disorder that took me 2.5 years to recover from. And there's a lot I could say on why I developed an eating disorder habits there, not just from the food, but because of the culture and the environment and the lack of training. But I know I'm not the only intern who left with disordered eating habits, and there are other interns who left with nutritional deficiencies as well. So the free meals and free housing thing wasn't actually, fulfilled that well on the end of Vision of Hope. And like we mentioned this earlier, how, we would tell staff like, oh, these meals need to change or whatnot, but we just were never listened to. We tried constantly to express different concerns to staff, but we were always shot down because, staff has the highest level of authority, and anybody else's voice doesn't really matter if you're not staff and if you're not particularly like the executive director. So for example, at probably towards like middle of my internship, me and a few other interns were all pretty like serious about the fact, hey, like, there's something wrong with this place, like, things need to change. And so one intern who had been there for the longest, she ended up, we talked about it, and she went to the clinical director, a woman, on behalf of all of us, to kind of describe that, we have issues with the internship and there needs to be a change. And the clinical director told her that she was in dirty, rotten sin of the devil and must repent for gossiping against the ministry, and that she must repent and seek forgiveness from all of us. And so when she came back from that meeting with the clinical director, she repented and sought forgiveness from all of us, and we repented to her because we're like, oh, I guess, we were participating in gossip as well. But it wasn't gossip. We were expressing our concerns and our burdens about what was going on, and that effectively silenced us. And there were many other times when interns and other people would try to address concerns, like even after my internship, I sent a 7-page letter to the executive director and the senior pastor of Faith Church, explaining the things I thought that needed to change. And the executive director responded, "I'm sorry that the internship did not meet up to your expectations," which is just kind of spinning the blame onto me that it was my expectations were wrong and not their actions. And they probably also they did claim that the internship was just bad because of COVID. But if you talk to anybody from like 10 years ago up until, more recently, like they would all say that it was pretty rough. And what's crazy also along with that is that interns who came after me, who are part of the support community, the three of us run, which we'll be talking about later, have actually told me that during their internship, they did go to staff and express their worries and concerns about the program, and staff told them that they were the only interns to have ever expressed concerns before, that it hadn't happened before, and which is a straight up lie, because it definitely had. I expressed concerns, many other people expressed concerns, so they were very much trying to keep any intern concerns kind of on the intern. Like, if you're concerned, it's your problem. So bottom line, interns really didn't have any voice, even though we were the ones running the ministry and doing a majority of the work. And, additionally, interns did get consequences, not quite to the extent that residents did, but it did happen. And I can think of one example from my time when an intern who had a night shift, she had worked, 8 hours that night and then didn't get to bed until late. And then she had to wake up at 5 a.m. the following morning for a morning shift. She forgot to make her bed and take out the staff's trash the previous day. And because of this, she had to write an essay on how she was a selfish and inconsiderate roommate who was not serving Christ, and how she would do better. Again, never mind the fact that she had served all day the previous day and was serving again early in the morning. She had to write this essay that made her out to be some heinous sinner. The Vision of Hope was really trying to put forth this perfectionist standard that isn't at all biblical. Because if we could be perfect, we wouldn't need God's mercy, and that's what the gospel is really all about, And that wasn't the only time I witnessed interns being threatened with consequences or just control. There was one intern who was threatened with isolation in the COVID quarantine suite, not because she had COVID or because she was exposed to COVID, but because there was some misunderstanding between her and staff, and they were going to put her in isolation where she could not talk to anybody else in the house or any interns who were her closest friends, any residents, and the only way she would be allowed to leave is if she was leaving the house. She luckily left and found a place to stay, but they were going to put her in isolation, which is insane. That's like a form of social torture. Interns also had many of our privileges just taken away from us if we were not vaccinated, limiting where we could go, who we could spend time with, and if we did leave, we of course had to wear a mask, even if there wasn't a mask mandate going on at the time. There was actually a time when we were told we needed permission from the executive director to even go to one of our friends' weddings. And during that meeting, I kind of had a breaking point. This is when I was really starting to break at Vision of Hope, and I spoke up and I said, the executive director has no right or say to what we do in our private lives, especially not after everything we do to serve here. And the room was silent, like you couldn't hear a pin drop. And I had to apologize to every person present for lashing out like that. There was actually one intern who disagreed and didn't want to comply with the director's COVID policies, and she was dismissed from the internship, and staff told us we were not allowed to talk to her after she left. And this kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of the public shaming and shunning that occurs at Vision of Hope. If there was ever quote unquote public sin committed, which many times it wasn't truly public sin, but staff interpreted that way. But if there was ever public sin, a resident would have to get up in front of the entire house and kind of repent and confess their sin, and just a very embarrassing and kind of humiliating way as punishment for what they did. And there were a couple times I believe interns had to do this as well. And even residents might not know exactly what's going on or why they're confessing sin or, their public sin, but staff would make them do it. And this really all goes back to that Vision of Hope was forcing this perfectionist standard onto residents and interns. That is not at all biblical, because the entire point of the gospel is that we don't need to be perfect because Jesus is perfect for us. And his sacrifice has given us the ability to mess up and to make mistakes, and for that to be okay. And Mission of Hope, literally, as Elena talked about in her story, was taking away people's salvations by saying, oh, you did this, so you can't be saved. You aren't saved. But it doesn't work like that, Jesus doesn't turn his back on you just because you drank a beer when you weren't supposed to. And it's such a twisted portrait of the gospel. And, you're probably at this point like, a lot of people say, well, why the heck didn't you leave? And there were many points where I wanted to leave, but I was so scared that Vision of Hope would cut me off from all the interns and residents and accuse me of leaving the internship in rebellion and on bad terms. And I was afraid they would mar my image and reputation. Because when you've spent a year of your life
you've left everything to go here, so like where are you supposed to go?
Yeah. And I still have my family back in Long Island, but I didn't have many friends in Long Island anymore. Like my entire life was in Lafayette. I was seeing someone there. Like my life was there. And when you spent a year of your life completely immersed in ministry, the people around you truly are like your only friends. They're your lifeline because you've been alienated from everyone and everything else. It's very much the same for residents. They spend 2 or 3 years there and they leave and they have nothing. So the isolation from the world is real. And I felt like I couldn't leave without being at risk of causing a rift in my relationships, especially because of that one intern that left that we were not allowed to talk to. And those relationships at Vision of Hope were some of the only friendships I had at that point outside of my family. And, the pressure of wanting to leave, but being stuck in this toxic environment became so much that I became suicidal during my time there, to the point where I had a plan in mind and I was close to doing it, to the point where I gave staff my epilepsy medication, which I'd been on since I was 4 years old, because at night I kept taking it and dumping it into my hands and feeling the urge to overdose. And I had never struggled with the temptation to drug abuse in any way before. That was very, very new. So I gave staff my medication for them to give me only a certain amount at a time. That is how suicidal and even just afraid of myself that I was. And I've since learned that I was not the only suicidal intern. There was a pattern of suicidal interns, and none of us knew it because staff, always encouraged us to keep our problems on the like very low key. We thought we were all alone in our struggles, and that's exactly what staff might have wanted us to think, because if we were alone in our struggles, then that means we're the problem, not them.
It also gives them complete control because it's that they've cut you off from family, friends, other mental health or not other mental health institutions, not like them. And as Elena talked about, like the complete control over the schedule, so that's like you have to rely on them.
Yes.
Instead of, and there are times that they give you like some self-control, but then berate you when you don't use that correctly according to their own standards. So they take away all your self-control, which is, I mean, I'm not a counselor. I have no therapy experience whatsoever. But the very little that I know is like one of the things you want to give somebody who's going through this, if you want to give them some agency, self-agency, some self-control, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and we had absolutely none of that. Like, it was everything. Your day was dictated minute by minute when you were on shift, and if you were off shift, like you were still being watched. Like there was nothing in our control, even down to the rooms that we lived in. It was very unhealthy, and at this point when I was suicidal, there I met weekly with the intern coordinator to discuss how I was doing, and I remember sitting in her office, like tears streaming down my face after sleepless nights of just crying and desperately wanting to go home to my family. And I sat in her office and I told her I felt so oppressed at Vision of Hope that I wanted to kill myself. I said those words. And she looked at me, she smiled, and she asked me what Bible verse I could meditate on. And then she told me to journal about my thoughts. and that was all the counsel I was given. They ended up pairing me with a biblical counselor who used to work for Vision of Hope to kind of give me extra support at this point. But her counsel was also pretty much the same, just meditate on scripture. And I remember even telling this counselor that I felt the source of my suicidalness was because of Vision of Hope. And she would not acknowledge that statement. She just like danced around it and kind of ignored it and would move on to another subject. And so at this point, for another couple weeks, I would continue to have those weekly meetings with the intern coordinator. And I would tell her the same thing. Like, I wanted to kill myself. 'Cause in my head, death was going to be an escape from the reputational harm, the conflict, the pain, the hurt, the pressure, the traumatic stories I'd hear on a daily basis with no training or mentorship to process through. It'd be an escape from the watchful eyes, the expectations, their standards, the work, all of it. And I get the same response. What Bible verse are you meditating on? And telling me to journal through my thoughts. And then she'd send me back on to shift to assist other mentally ill women who I was not in a mental state to help at all. And it was in May of 2021 that I was in a car with the guy I was seeing at the time. And we were driving back to Vision of Hope. And as I was driving, I just broke down in tears. And so we pulled into the Walmart parking lot that's there in Lafayette, and I parked and gripping onto the steering wheel and just sobbing. I kept saying I couldn't go back to Vision of Hope. I wanted to die. I was going to kill myself, and I just couldn't go back there, even though I felt like I had to, because I was not only afraid of how Vision of Hope would cut me off from the interns and residents, but I was afraid of leaving the residents and the interns in the staff's hands and not being there to advocate for them. So I kept repeating that I just wanted to kill myself. And I think I scared the guy, honestly, because he called my parents and basically told them that I needed to get the heck out of Vision of Hope and go home because I wasn't safe there anymore and it wasn't healthy for me. And my absolutely amazing best parents ever called Vision of Hope the next day. Within that hour of that guy I was seeing calling them, they booked a flight to Lafayette for the following week to come get me. And the next day, my parents called Vision of Hope and told them I was having medical problems and needed to come home. And that was a believable excuse and reason for me to leave because I'd had medical issues in the past. And because my parents were the ones that called them, it took me out of the equation, And so my parents flew out, they brought me home to New York, and that's when I finally received help for the mental issues and trauma that Vision of Hope afflicted me with, which that included actual therapy and psychiatry. And this next part of the story, I want to talk about because I think it's important. I think to the overarching of how my view of Vision of Hope evolved as I recovered from what happened there. So after leaving Vision of Hope, I decided I wanted nothing to do with God anymore. That was like my last try, because as I had said earlier, I was not truly a Christian when I came to Vision of Hope. My life spiraled for a while after that. I stopped going to church altogether. I was making a lot of bad choices. I was just done. And I didn't really know if God existed, but even if he was, I wanted nothing to do with him if Vision of Hope was a reflection of who he was. But I was very fortunate that I ended up having people come into my life that really reflected to me what the love of God means and how Christians are supposed to act. I moved in with some Christian girls who just wholly and unconditionally, despite the very, quote unquote ungodly lifestyle I was living, they just loved me for who I was. They never rebuked me. They never scolded me. They never told me I was in sin. They just lived alongside me and they loved me. And it was in seeing their hearts for me and their love for me that I saw Christ's heart and I began to ask questions and open up. And that was about a year and a half after I left Vision of Hope. And after that, I joined like a small house church, which was again just filled with more people who were a stark contrast to what I witnessed at Vision of Hope. And these people at this church, this small house church, knew I'd been religiously abused. They knew I was scared of even opening up a Bible, and they just walked alongside me and loved me. And it was a slow process, those 2 years, of where I completely reconstructed my belief system based solely on what I believe from the Bible and not what Vision of Hope told me or what anyone else told me. And it was really that healing journey and that process that made me realize just how awful Vision of Hope was, because now I know firsthand that the love of Christ is not at all even close to what they were conveying, and that what they were doing is quite the opposite. And that's really why I'm even on this podcast today, because people need to know that at the heart of the gospel is unconditional and sacrificial love. And if you've gone to Vision of Hope, or if you've experienced religious abuse in general, that's not God. And it should grieve the Christian community that this portrayal of God is happening, not just at Vision of Hope, but in so many other places. It breaks my heart that some people who call themselves Christians project such a distorted view.
Yep. Amen to that. All right, then last one for her experience, staff. So we got resident perspective with Lena, intern perspective with Abigail. Now we got staff perspective with Rachel. So what was it like being
like
staff?
I said before, I started as an intern. I became a staff member. So I think the higher that I got in authority at Vision of Hope, the more I just saw the corruption, the use of power and control. But while I was there, I really didn't see it for what it was, because you're just kind of going through all these things. You're so busy. You're like drowning in work all the time. So you don't have time to think about what's going on there or question that anything there is wrong. So I felt like I was pleasing God because I was obeying my authorities, the people like higher up staff, they're senior staff, I'm little baby staff. So I still have to follow all their rules, and we're all submitted under the church, which is, Faith Church. So ultimately, like, the pastor, senior pastor at Faith Church is the head authority over all of Vision of Hope and all of that. So as an intern, the staff are highly critical of the interns, as you've heard about from Abby's perspective. And again, there's basically no training. Anybody can come and do this internship. It's not like you have to have a degree in psychology, or they would prefer you don't, because they don't believe in psychology. But you're given this 2-week training, and then you're trying to figure out what the heck just happened. So there's particular staff members that we've kind of talked about, everybody's kind of terrified of as a resident or as an intern. Even as a staff member, I was still terrified of her, certain people. And I remember I was an intern leading house cleaning, and she came over to me and she was like, "Why are you doing it this way? Did nobody train you?" And I was like, "No." Or if I ended house cleaning early, I was scolded because the residents need to go outside and pick up trash, not just be sitting around doing nothing. Like, it's just like this, they need to always be doing something, and I should have known better. So when I became staff, I thought there'd be like a little more training maybe, but really no. So one of my responsibilities was to teach class in the mornings, which somebody talked about how the morning class was usually like a live taught class by one of the staff members, and then the afternoon class that was like a recorded sermon. So again, these are some kind of book that we're going through, and it's basically just like we're reading through the book, kind of having a little group discussion. And so basically the whole training I received was I went to a class and watched another staff member teach one class, and then it was me. And like, I've never read these books. Like, I know nothing about these books. I don't even know like what chapter we're on or what we're doing, like. And so I'm leading a discussion about something I had no idea about. There is the books, again, there are things like Trusting God, Lies Women Believe, Choosing Gratitude, Overcoming Anger, Girls Gone Wise in a World Gone Wild. That one, like, anybody who's been to Vision of Hope is groaning at the title of that book because everyone hated that. It was basically like modesty, how women need to be quiet and tame people, and not wear anything that would cause men to stumble, not have sex before marriage because then you're dirty, and like all those things basically. So that was that. There's also this aspect of like, even as a staff member, you really don't know what's going on actually in the house. Like, my whole perspective of what happened with Abigail when she left the internship, I had no idea like anything was going on. Like, she and I were friends, and so I wish I could have been there to kind of support her better, but like there was so much isolation that it's like, this isn't something you need to know about. Where they have a saying that it's keep the circle small. So basically it's an idea of trying to like avoid gossip, but they kind of take it to the extreme, and that a lot of times they tell a different story about what happened than actually what happened. So like, for example, my sister actually came and did the internship. And so while we were there, I was a staff member, she was an intern. At one point, she and another intern went to the clinical director and brought some of their concerns. So a lot of people have done that, but it's usually met with gaslighting. From my perspective, I was told in staff meeting that not my sister, but the other girl that went with her, she is going to leave the internship because she's not willing to be a member of the church. That's what I was told. There was no like story of, oh, you know, they brought these concerns to us and we had a discussion, whatever. Like, I only knew that they had talked to them because I had walked by that office and I'd seen them having a discussion. And so like, yeah, there's a lot of things like that I found out a completely different story after leaving a Vision of Hope than what I was told while I was there. So that's, again, the control of like, we're going to control even the narrative of what's being told about any situation. There was also, while I was there was a girl that had left the program after several months of being there. So a lot of the residents that were currently there really knew her and loved her. She had actually started the process of reapplying to the program. And I don't remember how I found out exactly, but I had found out that she had committed suicide. And it was handled very strangely. So the first couple of days, there was not like an obituary out. And so the clinical director told us we could not say anything. We couldn't tell anybody, like, if a resident said, did this person die? Like, we couldn't even say yes or no. Like, it was like, basically, hush, hush, don't talk about it. Residents can't talk to each other about it. That's it. And so the staff told the residents that they needed to fill out an orange slip for crisis counseling or talk to their counselor in their session that week. But they can't talk to each other about what happened. And so then the staff, we weren't even allowed to admit, like, we knew what was going on until that obituary came out. And I know of at least 2 residents who committed suicide after leaving the program, and I'm sure there's a lot more. And again, those are stories that are a lot of times spun to be a different narrative that, oh, this person, like, I'm pretty sure I was told this person died in a car crash, and later I found out they committed suicide. So there's just like, I mean, that could have just been like a rumor, like somebody else said that, and then that's what I heard. But, I know, like Abby mentioned, there's a lot of interns and staff members who are extremely suicidal or attempted suicide while working there. And I think Elena, again, put it really well of the program's structured to break you, whether you're a resident, whether you're an intern, whether you're a staff member, they want to drive you to insane perfectionism so that, and then nobody can do that, so that leads you to hopelessness and despair and further suicidal thoughts. So just me personally, during my time at Vision of Hope, I got progressively worse and worse. So I was in biblical counseling while I was there being a counselor. And it started out because I wanted to ensure that I was pleasing God in how I handled the relationship that I was in at the time. I wanted to set boundaries and do all the good Christian things. But over the time that I was there, I had struggled with self-harm a while ago, but I hadn't self-harmed in like years. And then I went from being extremely anorexic to bulimia, throwing up multiple times a day, cutting myself almost every day, and having suicidal thoughts every day. And I felt like a complete hypocrite to be counseling these women, but be having the exact same struggles. And to be in counseling, but feel like biblical counseling doesn't really help people. So I started kind of to doubt my faith and feel really lost working there. And I finally got the courage to talk to the clinical director about everything that I was struggling with. So I fully expected going into that meeting that I was going to be fired or asked to step down or something like that. But the response was that I should continue on exactly how I had been and that it would help me to continue counseling other women. And then she quoted Proverbs 28:13 that says, "He who conceals his sin will not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces them will find mercy." And so basically I was shown mercy because I confessed my sin. And that was basically it. So I was honestly shocked that I was told I should stay. And it was probably because there was such a high turnover. It was so hard to get staff to work at Vision of Hope which should tell you something. They really did try to get interns to become staff, but a lot of interns stopped wanting to become staff because of how bad the internship was. And so that was always a struggle, was there was not enough staff and everybody's run super thin. Everybody has a lot of responsibilities and nobody knows what they're doing. And then later, towards the end of my time there, they actually banned the interns from having any kind of like mentorship or counseling from the church, because if they're there as an intern, they should already have figured out their problems, and if they haven't, then they shouldn't be an intern. So yeah, that's basically my story and the staff perspective.
All right. There's a lot of stuff. So first, thanks for describing all of your guys' experience at Vision of Hope / Sword of Faith Church and ACBC and how all these things combine. For those who are not aware of how this stuff works, now they're aware of at least one. And I do have a question at the end of this that I want to ask. But you all, Abigail, you talked about this before recording, and we talked about this in a previous phone call too. You all, and I think all of you are a part of it as well. But Abigail, I don't know if you lead this necessarily or just kind of the leading voice. But can you talk about Hope Restored community, what that is, and who's part of it and what it does?
Yeah, so me, Elena, and Rachel are all admins or administrators of Hope Restored, which is basically a community for religious abuse survivors to kind of come alongside each other and find peer support. This initially started because a couple years after leaving Vision of Hope, I found out about a Facebook group for past VO affiliates to kind of share their stories. And this was a Facebook group for the bad stories. Like there was another Facebook group that made by Vision of Hope to, share like happy-go-lucky stories. And then there was this one that I found and I joined. And at that point, there were, I think, less than 20 people in it at the time, maybe like 17. I forget exactly. But to me, because I hadn't really talked to many people yet about how bad my experience was at Vision of Hope, because I was still a little scared of Faith Church's influence at that time. When I saw that there were so many other people, 17 other people, that had bad experiences, I was like, oh my goodness, like other people had bad experiences here. And so I ended up talking with the individual who ran it at that time, and we decided we wanted to start interviewing people to then kind of send a report to Faith Church about the harm that Vision of Hope did. And they added me as an admin to the Facebook group. But as I started talking to former residents and former interns that were already in the group, I realized that so many have already tried to explain to Faith Church the issues that were going on, including myself. And I realized as I spoke with people that this was just a pattern. And so the interviews kind of subsided, and it more just became, we started trying to make the Facebook group a safe place for past VO people to come and talk about their experiences. Because as we've heard from this podcast, if you're part of VO and you ever brought up concerns, you were silenced. There was never any room to really talk about it and just process through it. And because Faith Church has such a big influence, there's a lot of stigma against saying anything bad about them. And so this became kind of like a safe haven for people to come and talk about their experiences. And eventually the former admin stepped down and I took over continuing to run it, which is when I asked Rachel to come alongside and run it with me, because I didn't want the power of running that alone. And then eventually Elena joined as well, which just ended up being a great team and mix for us, because we have intern, staff, and residents all on the admin team, all representing the very different perspectives and stories that kind of come out of Vision of Hope. And while I initially came into the group, there were, less than 20 members. And I thought to myself, wow, I can't believe there's this many people. We are now at over 100 members, and we're continuing to grow. And that's all by word of mouth. We haven't done any like advertising or anything for it. It's just literally people joining, and then they tell people that they know we're at VO, and then those people join, and then it's just grown. And it's, there's a lot more people out there that would probably benefit from it that we probably just haven't found yet. But as part of this group, we also meet monthly virtually as needed for anyone who wants to have face-to-face camaraderie and just talk about their experiences in a like moderated format by a peer. You know, none of us are therapists or psychology professionals. We're all just kind of peer support. And people can post in this group about their stories, and we're able to just kind of come alongside each other and say, hey, I went through that too. You aren't alone in feeling this way. And we have a smaller group chat for those who want to talk about like more personal things or non-Vo related things as well. And it was through this group that Rachel, Elena, and I noticed a larger need, not just for Vision of Hope survivors, but for religious abuse survivors in general. Because we especially had a lot of people actually coming to us and saying like, oh, can I join your group? Like I had bad experiences at Faith Church, but we wanted to keep the Vision of Hope groups kind of sacred for Vision of Hope people because it's such a unique experience, and it can be a little hazy bringing outside people into that for the ones who are already in the group. So as of a few weeks ago, we have officially started a separate group for those who have experienced any form of religious abuse, including forms of harmful biblical counseling. And we're calling it Hope Restored Community, as I mentioned earlier, which is kind of meant to be a play on words from Vision of Hope, in saying that through community, through sharing our stories, and through sharing our voices, which were once silenced, we've found this restoration of hope. We have a website now and social media, which will be used to share stories from all kinds of religious abuse survivors, share resources on healing and deconstructing and reconstruction, share art and passions and merchandise made by survivors. And so it's really just meant to be a support network for survivors to find hope and a space to voice their struggles safely, and like-minded peers to help deconstruct from harmful thought reform and reconstruct who they are apart from any harmful practices they were taught. The Vision of Hope group remains a safe place for just Vo survivors, so that's open to anyone who's gone to Vision of Hope and would say, hey, this was harmful for me. But this new group is open to anyone, including those who may have been harmed by Faith Church or ACBC in general, or experienced harm from other religious groups. And you can find us online at hoperestoredcommunity.wordpress.com, and our connection page has all the information needed to join our groups or kind of just see more about what we're doing.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have that in our show notes as well to make it easily accessible for those who are looking at this too. You guys brought this up in this little one sheet. Again, very eternally grateful for you guys doing all my work for me beforehand. But I thought fun is the wrong word. Maybe a thought exercise in some sense to let people know, because this will lead into my last question before your guys' call to action. But if you could think of one story that you've heard from those in your community, the Hope Restored community, that doesn't encapsulate all the abuse, but it's like that is something else that you guys have gone through here that gives people a sense like, hey, it's not just what happened to you three. There's a lot more people. So something that encapsulates in some sense what goes on at Vision of Hope.
Did one of you guys want to start?
Go ahead, Abigail. Or whoever.
So like one thing that we haven't really discussed is that like this program was at one point, I don't believe it is anymore, but it was for women 14 years old and older. I think it was initially designed for like 14 to like 29 or something like that, but sometimes they did have older women as well. But so they had minors, and it always really bothered me with like how the minors were kind of like treated. They were obviously like, they were almost like parented in a way, but in a very like strict kind of way. But then they also like, they were supposed to be doing schoolwork, but they would be lucky to get an hour and a half to 2 hours a week of schoolwork done. And they would have to ask for permission for it to be able to be, for them to be able to do it in study hall or times outside of their like homework, their class time. And so that, like, as someone who also didn't receive much of an education, that always like bothered me. Is like, you know, this is these kids' futures. Like, you can't just like give them a bunch of Bible verses and not let them do schoolwork and expect them to succeed. And so just the way that they treated the minors, like with that kind of idea, I know that one girl told me that when she graduated and then she turned 18 and she went to college, they really tried to recruit her to be an intern, and they expected her to leave her college program just to come back and give back to Vision of Hope. There was another girl who she came from a very, very hard experience, very cultish experience, and there was just this expectation of just, getting her to like accept Jesus and like, like not have any beliefs in that like old cult thing, and just kind of like come to the new cult, I guess. And so like there was an extra intense sense of pressure on the minors, and so like I always struggled watching them. It was like I wanted to like just like advocate for them, but at the same time you don't do that, like that's one way to get in trouble, is telling them they're handling something wrong. But yeah, so it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I would say so. I have like maybe two examples that I want to touch on that both really overall impacted my view of Vision of Hope. And I don't know if I would say it's really hard to narrow down the craziest things we saw because everything was so crazy. And honestly, every day we hear um, news stories that just get crazier. But one thing that we heard from someone who was there, I think they were there maybe 10 years ago, but it still applies because it still was happening even when I was there. There was one individual who was put on, which Elena mentioned earlier, no talking consequences. And she was put on them for over 3 weeks, where she was not allowed to talk to anyone unless she was in crisis. If she was in crisis, she could go and talk to an intern. But if you were at risk, though, if you said you were in crisis and the intern or staff decided you weren't, then you might get consequences. So this individual, they were on it for, I believe they said over 3 weeks. And this kind of goes into a bigger issue, I think, of Vision of Hope, in that there is so much discrimination against people with neurodivergent disabilities. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the people that I witnessed and the people that I've heard that have been put on no talking consequences were either autistic or ADHD. And, if you know anything about autism or ADHD, for some people, it can be a struggle to know when to talk or when not to talk. And this is something that Vision of Hope made them feel very guilty and selfish over, rather than helping them learn how to navigate social circumstances in a healthy way. And most solution to them talking too much would be, oh, you can't talk at all. And they would label autistic and ADHD individuals as selfish talkers and then put them on these consequences. But obviously, for many neurodivergent people, excessive talking is not always able to be controlled if you aren't taught helpful coping practices. So then they might accidentally slip up and talk, and then they would get punished by having their free time taken away, having to write essays about their sin, or having their no talking consequences extended, which was the case for that individual who had their no talking consequences go on for quite a long time. And there's a lot, I feel like, that goes into the discrimination of neurodivergent people there. But that is my first example of something just crazy, because I don't think anybody should ever have their right to speak taken away from them. That is just wrong on many levels. And again, is a form of social isolation, and just further struggle. The second example that I would say is, and this really showcases kind of how the executive director, who was the only man in the entire ministry. There was only one man in the entire ministry, and he was the executive director. And this really showcases kind of how he was almost treated like he was God. There was a house meeting one day while I was there, because many residents were not happy with the COVID policies this director was putting into place, which did not allow them any visits or to see their families. And the meeting that was being had, which included all the interns and all the residents and any staff members who were there, the meeting was designed to address the residents' quote grumbling and complaining, in the words of staff. And the clinical director spoke on behalf of the executive director, who was not at this meeting, and she told the residents that they still would not be allowing visits because the executive director said so. And one resident, who had a husband and children that she hadn't seen in a while, courageously spoke out and basically alluded to that we were treating this man's word like it was God's word. And the clinical director immediately dismissed her from the room, and she was later dismissed from the program for not taking back her words. And when this first happened, I was astounded. I was like, oh, how could she challenge, the executive director's, ruling, because we were brainwashed at that point to think that staff knows what's best. But months later, her words would stick with me as I continued through my internship, because we had an intern class one day, which intern class happened once a week on Thursday mornings, where the executive director would basically give us a glorified Bible study. It wasn't really training at all. It was a glorified Bible study. And I honestly can't remember what he was talking about, because I didn't pay attention most of the time in these classes. And the intern, one of the interns that was inside the class, she was listening to him, and as he spoke, she stopped him and said, "That's not right." And she turned to her Bible and refuted what he said using scripture. And it was, we all were kind of listening to her lay out the scripture and refute what he said. And rather than him opening his Bible in return and, having a healthy debate or conversation, he said, "Well, I'm the teacher, so I'm right." And that was that. Like, there was no further discussion of it. And that kind of really signaled to me how much Vision of Hope thought the executive director was kind of like a God authority, because he elevated his own word above scripture. Like, he didn't use scripture to refute what she said at all. He just said, "Well, I'm a teacher, so I'm right." And that was. So yeah, those are a couple examples of like the power hierarchy that happens there. And I think it's just really unhealthy and crazy in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Rachel, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll share two quick examples. So one, I think, is just like the medical neglect. Like, I think anybody from anytime they were there witnessed that. There was residents, like, I know there was one resident that broke their foot and was forced to continue doing workout, do rec, do all these things, not take them to the doctor. Like, a lot of times it was like an excuse of, staff is too busy, we don't have somebody that can take that resident right now. They're like, again, they're just manipulating you. They're not really injured or sick or whatever it was. There was also a resident that she literally had a seizure in the house, and we had to get like the ambulance and everything. And she was just basically dismissed from the program on medical issues and told she could never come back. There's just like they need a doctor there. They need someone. They need a lot of things. They just need to burn it to the ground, basically. But yeah, there's a lot of issues. And then the other thing I just thought about is the way that they would kind of keep residents in the program for so long and then still not let them graduate. Like, there was a resident that was there probably 3 years. She had repeated phase 1 multiple times. She would get to phase 2 and get phased back to phase 1, like all those things. And it got to the point that the counselor during staff meeting basically said, "I just can't handle this anymore. Like, I can't help her any further, but she's like not graduate material. So we're just gonna say like she's done." But like, and she's like, so they just basically decided for her that, she's done with the program. She did not get to graduate, and she was not given any explanation as to what happened. She was just basically told, "You're done with the program. We can't help you any further." And that was that. So yeah, just things like that.
Yeah. To add on one more thing, because I think this is also just, as far as like punishments go, to show a little bit more of the control aspect. I've heard stories from multiple former residents where if they forgot to transfer over their laundry, they would have their clothing confiscated from them, and they would have to buy it back with blessing bucks, which you earn blessing bucks by saying Bible verses. So if they forgot to transfer their laundry from the washing machine to the dryer, staff would confiscate it, put it in the blessing closet, and over the course of weeks, they would have to buy it back. And when they would get their clothing back, it wouldn't have been dried for them, so it would be mildewy and gross, And why would you take away someone's clothing, just because they messed up and they forgot? Like, again, that goes along with a lot of the aspects of there's just no grace and no mercy at Vision of Hope when there should be.
Yeah, they do that. Sorry.
What's that?
They
Go for it.
they would do that with, like, if you left your book bag around somewhere too, and usually that's where you would, like, have your counseling homework and stuff, and you'd only be able to, like, get out your Bible and, like, some pieces of paper. Sometimes they wouldn't even let you get out your, like, homework sheet or whatever. And so on top of not having your material, not having your books, not having any of the stuff that you needed to do your homework with, you had to, like, buy it back that next, and there was only one day that you could buy stuff back, and then you would get in trouble for not doing your counseling homework because you didn't have, the counseling sheet or whatever. And so it was a very much like a no-win system for that.
Yeah. All right. So second to last thing, lawsuits. I know there's some things that are public right now, or things that are ongoing. So, Rachel, if you can, Rachel and then Abigail next for this. What's going on right now, and how can people who are listening to this join in some sense?
Yeah, so there was a article that was written by the Lafayette Journal and Courier, and they kind of explain everything really well. So I'm going to read some things of basically how they have it outlined, and then kind of discuss it. So basically, the resident lawsuit was filed on May 9th of 2025. It alleges that Faith Church and Vision of Hope used residents as unpaid labor by forcing them to clean the church sanctuary and church-owned facilities, such as its school, building, and community centers, as well as work without pay in the church's retail store. The residents were also performed lawn care, landscaping at the church properties. The lawsuit alleges that Vision of Hope staff used the threat of peer and communal shunning to force compliance. The lawsuit alleges that unpaid labor force reduced Faith and its ministries from needing to pay employees for janitorial services, landscaping and lawn care, retail store staffing, as well as running errands. There's also a second lawsuit that was filed before the resident one in regards to the internship, that the intern alleged that Faith Church and Vision of Hope violated federal labor laws by not paying them. That basically, because the internship really, you did not you can't have an unpaid internship where you really don't learn anything. You have to actually learn something for it to be considered like a legitimate internship. So that's the issue with that. And then I'm just gonna read. There's a response that Faith Church provided to the Journal and Courier for the article. So this is what their response to this lawsuit is. Faith Ministries has been reviewing broader issues about Vision of Hope's operations since well before any legal action occurred, according to their statement. That review is to fully assess our operations and counseling to ensure we are fulfilling our vision for the ministry. After listening carefully, we formed a restructure team who spoke to various constitutes to identify changes with the goal of making Christ-honoring improvements. We are thankful for those who have shared concerns, and we invite those who desire to help us improve the ministry to contact us. So, I mean, I think anybody listening at this point should understand that's not true at all. They're like on no level, they don't welcome feedback. There is no place to give input or suggestions, and anybody who does is basically silenced, labeled as a rebel. They're told they need to seek repentance for wrongly making these accusations. They've not been reviewing Vision of Hope since before the lawsuit was issued. People have begged Faith Church, leaders of Vision of Hope, to make changes. And I will say there are some changes that I've heard are being made to the program currently, and they did start paying the interns, so there are some changes that are happening, but I still don't believe all the changes will just dissolve the issues, because Vision of Hope is still under Faith Church, and Faith Church itself has serious issues as well. So yeah, and then Abby, I think you wanted to add something about the lawsuit.
Yeah, so as far as like the claims that they've been working on those problems for quite some time, like prior to the lawsuits, I don't believe Vision of Hope started working on them until they got wind that the lawsuits were coming, because I haven't heard from anyone that they were reached out to get advice on it or to give feedback on the program until after the lawsuits kind of started gathering up. And someone from Faith Church, who is, I guess, heading up the reconstruction of Vision of Hope, reached out to me because I've been vocal about the issues about the program, and they asked to meet with me to, go over what I thought could change. And me and another former intern kind of just typed up all of our list of, recommendations and sent it to her. And she basically said, they don't really know anything yet, but, they're going to take into consideration and all that. And the last thing I left her with was, probably one of the biggest things that needs to occur is Faith Church needs to take ownership for the fact that they have caused harm and they have caused accountability. Like, why are you making changes? It's because, like, harm has been done. But Vision of Hope and Faith Church won't acknowledge that. And so I told them that they need to, reconcile with past residents and, acknowledge publicly that they have done wrong. And they didn't really say much back to that outside of, they're gonna keep me updated on how things go. And it was just a few weeks later that the senior pastor of Faith Church sent out an email to all the members, and this was also part of one of the media statements they gave, just about the lawsuits and saying how they were disheartened about the accusations from residents and that residents are always free to come and go from the program as they please, like very much changing the narrative in their favor and still not acknowledging that, yes, they have done wrong. So, yes, while it's good that Vision of Hope is starting to make changes, the bottom line is if you're going to be a Christian organization, then do the Christian thing and acknowledge that wrong has been done and reconcile with the people, with tons and tons of people that you've hurt. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for listeners,
right, we'll end on. Oh yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna add, for listeners, just for the lawsuit, the girl in charge of it, I asked her if she wanted me to mention her name. She said yes. So her name's Hosanna. You guys can just keep her in your thoughts and prayers and encourage her in any way you can, because she's under a lot of pressure, as she's the one kind of the head person of the lawsuit. And Faith Church has already tried to file a motion to dismiss the whole lawsuit, and that was denied, thankfully. So she's going through a lot right now. So think of her, and if there's anything else that can be done, I'll let you guys know.
Awesome. So with that, and Elena, we'll start with you. That's if you can talk to survivors, whether they be those that you've not heard from at Vision of Hope or those in similar situations or ACBC just in general. So if you can talk to those who are listening, and then Abigail, talk to, in general, Christians who are listening and say like, hey, why should we care about this when there's so much quote unquote wokeness going on in the church and all these other things we should really be caring about, not about religious abuse or anything else like that. So Elena, we'll start with you, and then Abigail, you'll finish this off.
Yeah, it's really just like you said, like, we are here with our stories and our experiences, and VO is a kind of subset of ACBC and Faith Church in that abusive like environment, but we also understand that like I know people that have been harmed by ACBC, by conservative and fundamental churches and cults. And so I just want to say that if you guys are listening to this, just know that you're not alone, that we're here for you, that we understand you and we care. That's why we have Hope Restored. Religious abuse is a very real thing, and many people have experienced. It's something that's often kind of downplayed, but it is real. It is legitimate. And the journey from healing for that can seem never ending. It's definitely an ongoing process, but with community, that burden does become so much lighter. We would love to have you join Hope Restored, and just experience that safety and community that can be found in sharing your stories and your struggles with those who understand them firsthand and have experienced them as well. We are available to be messaged on the different platforms that we have. And we would love to hear your story or to just talk personally. The purpose of Hope Restored is that survivors can be heard and have valuable community and peer support, because that's something that religious abuse tries to take away. But I do want to say that we are not professionals, and we definitely encourage you to consider reaching out to a professional therapist or psychiatrist if you need help with your mental health. But we do hope that you feel safe to join our community, to experience the power of support, community, and voice. But I also know that there are some people who haven't experienced that, and so Abigail, I know, wants to talk to them.
Yeah, so as far as like just the Christians who may be listening, I think again there's a lot of stigma against speaking up against Christian organizations or Christian ministries just because you don't want to harm the whole Christian outlook, But I went my entire life, like I said earlier, faking being Christian, and it wasn't until after Vision of Hope that I became so hopeless that I didn't even have the strength or desire to fake it anymore. And it wasn't until after I found Christians who loved me so genuinely, who acknowledged the awful things that I experienced there, and who grieved with me over that abuse, that I started to experience full redemption and restoration in Christ. Because I realized that Bill was not a proper reflection of Christ and that I was being misled by them. I'd feel pretty confident in saying, and I think Rachel and Elena would agree with this, that over half of the individuals who we talk with and walk alongside from Vision of Hope are not Christians anymore and want nothing to do with God, or they are in a place of confusion where they aren't sure and they are just scared of God. And these are all people who went to Vision of Hope because they believed in God in some way. I've seen individuals who come into Vision of Hope absolutely on fire for God, and they left completely denouncing Christ. And if Vision of Hope was accurately reflecting Christ, it would be winning souls for Jesus more than it would be chasing them away. And the fact that so many are being turned away from Christ because of this distorted reflection is something that should really cause outrage and righteous anger in the Christian community. For me personally, I have been called a slanderer and a gossiper, and I've been told I'm in sin for speaking out against Vision of Hope. But truth is not gossip, especially when you have tried so hard to privately deal with it as we have. And we have multiple witnesses and people who can corroborate the things that we've spoken about. And calling it gossip is exactly what Vision of Hope tried to do, and that's what let them get away with abuse and neglect for so long, because they called it gossip. As Christians, we're called to defend the oppressed, to seek justice, because that's exactly what Jesus did during his ministry here on earth when he himself spoke out against religious leaders who were misusing God's word. So I urge you that if you've listened to this podcast and you feel uncomfortable about the things you've heard, just reach out to us. Reach out to Peter, because there's going to be that temptation to say, oh, I'm uncomfortable because this is gossip. But no, you're uncomfortable because these things are grieving. And it should make you uncomfortable to know that abuse of God's word and Christian principles is occurring throughout Christian community. And if we're not loudly speaking against harmful religious practices, then how will people see the difference between abuse and the love of God? And the issue of religious abuse is so much larger than just Vision of Hope or just Faith Church or just ACBC, but it's something that infiltrates our culture. And the first step in combating religious abuse and toxic culture is recognizing that it exists and that it needs to be dealt with, not pushed under the rug, and definitely not ignored. So overall, whoever you are, reach out. We're here to walk alongside you, to help you navigate your experiences, to help you understand religious abuse, and we're not going anywhere. So we really appreciate having this space on this podcast just to talk about our stories and experience. So thank you, Peter.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. I'll leave it on that because that's better than anything else I can say to end. So thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.